everyone, welcome to another live of Ken Reads, and I apologise for being about 20 minutes late today. Keen to dive straight into this one. So for those of you that are new to this segment, this is where I take letters from followers and read out their experience they had in dating and share my 2 cents onto what happened. Sometimes I will be very clear and be like, yep, it seems like there's definitely issues here with attachment related stuff going on. Other times I won't go that far because it's a little unclear, but I offer this as an opportunity for validation and also collective healing, because sometimes these stories that are read out are frankly very similar to what people have gone through. And I think a lot of people often feel quite relieved when they hear this, being like, oh, thank God, I can see myself in this person's shoes for what they've been through. Now, before I get into this letter, I just wanted to say 2 quick things. One, I've received a lot of people who are like, I want to submit my letter to you. Now, again, I haven't got a formal page set up just yet for receiving letters and also taking payments from them as well too, because I just want to get through the load that I have at the moment. If you are interested, however, in sending me something, just express your interest in the comments of this video or DM me about it and I can see what we can organize behind the scenes. But I just need to let you know there is probably about 10 letters that I need to get through before yours will probably be, read out. And I'm also going to try and get through a few next week, as well as maybe doing another one of these later today, because I have the time for it. So, I'm happy to just take it one step at a time with everything else that's going on too. All right. So the second thing that I also wanted to mention was probably, I think I've already mentioned it. Actually, you know what? I'm going to skip that one. I think that's totally fine. So yeah, just long story short, if you're interested in submitting a letter to me, you're very welcome to discuss that with me in the DMs of Instagram, and I'll see what I can do and we can just take it from there. Other than that though, let's get straight into this particular letter that I have got from Louise detailing her situation with her partner called Louis. So Louise writes, my ex-boyfriend, Louie, who's 28 years old, and I said at 2 years of dating, if all is going well, we would likely be engaged. For a bit of context, all of Louie's friends are married. Louie was homeschooled until high school. His parents divorced when he was 23 years old. His dad was never around. His dad cheated on his mum and married his mistress, who doesn't even speak the same language as him. His mum used Louie as his therapist. Louie has low self-esteem, is negative, critical, very stoic, an overthinker, and is very sarcastic. People in school said he has a resting bitch face. Louie never took compliments well or gift giving, and it took him 10 months to say, I love you, as I was his first love. His previous relationship was on and off for years. A year into dating, we were both not ready for engagement. I started counseling to prepare, and I asked if he wanted to do couples counseling, Bible study together, and he said no, because he would not be honest with his feelings. He said he needed more time, space, with less plans to prepare during this time, so that is what I gave him. We would talk about our future together, but when our 2-year mark approached, he stopped talking about our future. I brought this up to him and he said, I don't want to say something I don't mean. And then I asked, do you still see me as your wife one day? And he said yes. I told him if we were not ready for engagement, we could wait another year. We agreed to talk 1 time a month about our future, and he said he would always fight for us and also our future together in a relationship. Then, all of a sudden, he would blindside me. He started avoiding me at group events. He would be controlling if I would not be there or not. He would dictate whether I could come to certain group events. There were short dates in public that started, and there were also only short text messages that were a big departure from the longer messages I used to receive from him. When I asked how I could best support him, he would try to change the conversation and shut down. Randomly, he was crying and tried to break up with me twice for reasons he did not know, despite us agreeing that everything was going really well between us. He said things like, maybe our personalities don't align and I should be excited to get engaged and I'm not. He was very affirming, saying, I love you. I don't want to let you go. You are the best. I left for a vacation, and during that time, he was very attentive while I was away, and then as soon as I got back, he broke everything off for good when I returned. He was bawling and crying and said, I could not rely on him long term. He sees qualities in himself that he sees in his dad. Louie never cheated though, but he's afraid of commitment, marriage, and he is hyper independent. He knows he has an avoidant attachment and cannot process his emotions. He said, maybe I can't ever be married and I cannot be a good partner to anyone right now. When I asked, would we get back together? And he said, no, since his feeling against commitment is too crushing for him. And he said he will be second guessing this decision every single day. I never talked to him again. Okay. And Louise rounds out by saying, thank you for the time to read this. You're welcome. And she asks, what are your thoughts on this? Is this typical of someone who's more fearful avoidant, dismissive avoidant? Also is asking, is sarcasm and overthinking a trauma response? Also, do avoidants experience more emotions around animals such as dogs, as that is when I saw him at his happiest? Is someone being stoic a sign of emotional unavailability? Is crying an emotional release, but not a way to process emotion? Okay, Louise, thank you very much for sharing your story. And if anyone also wants to share their own 2 cents on this story, you're very welcome to in the comments below. Let's dive in. Firstly, I'm sorry that you had that experience because that does sound pretty intense to go through. I mean, when you are connecting with a partner and you've agreed to talk about the future together, engagement, and your plans together, and they're telling you, yeah, everything's fine, but then also finding these moments to tell you that they want to break up with you abruptly and say things like, maybe it's our personalities that don't align. Like, what does that even mean? Like, it just makes no sense when you hear that. And it makes you think like, I'm sorry, like what? This isn't necessarily a relationship deal breaker. And it sounds to me like for Louie, he also really struggles with words of affirmation in that he struggles to be very clear and upfront about how he feels towards you. And so, when I was hearing this, or when I was reading this, I was thinking, it seems to me like he's someone who really struggles to connect with his feelings. And I think by his own admission, the fact that he's aware of the fact that he's avoidant and he's also disconnected from his emotions would confirm that. And to me, it suggests there's a bit of alexithymia, a disconnection from emotion, and the inability to articulate and express his emotions is going on as well too. But there is something here that I want to address that was unique to me that I haven't seen across other letters that I've read out to people as well too. Now, I want to make this very clear. I am not an expert in neurodivergence. I am not an expert, particularly in autism. But whilst autism is a big spectrum and there are many neurotypes in the realm of autism, I do have to admit there were some signs in here that made me think, I wonder if Louie actually might also be possibly in the realm of being a bit autistic, on the basis that we know certain neurotypes also can present with some of the symptoms that you've described here. Resting bitch face, alexithymia, struggling to, communicate and express their emotions. And also someone who was, I think there was some other signs here that you mentioned too that was making me think it was definitely like it could be in that line as well too. Some of the overthinking that he was experiencing as well too. There were probably a few other things that I could think about that were part of this as well, but it made me think, I wonder if there's a neurodivergence piece that's going on here too, along with the avoidant attachment. But I can't make that claim 100% for sure. But it's not uncommon for some cases to have overlap where there's ADHD, there's autism, and there's also an attachment issue as well too. Separately, I don't think that his childhood would have been conducive to any positive upbringing. I mean, Louie's obviously grown up where he's had an overbearing mum, so that would suggest there's obviously been some form of maybe emotional incest. He's also had a father who has cheated and abandoned him and the family. And losing that parent, that protective parent, is never healthy for anyone to go through as well. And so it does make me think, okay, obviously worried about, turning into the dad. And that's a fear that I think a lot of us have, regardless of our attachment styles, of turning into the, a emotionally distant or unavailable parent. So totally get that. And then, as this person's mentioned here too, which I'll get to that point in a minute about him weeping about what happened. To me, this is already a recipe for this man, Louie, has obviously had a history of developmental trauma that is probably having a direct impact on his romantic relationships. As for the crying, I can see one person here says, I also experienced my ex-partner openly weeping when ending the relationship, but didn't seem to understand the consequence of the loss. Yeah, this is very consistent for some avoidant attachers where they'll cry at the end of the relationship, but they're not really crying at the loss. It's more like they're crying about themselves and how they're like, I don't know if I'll ever be able to get over this decision that I've made on behalf of our relationship. I worry that I'm going to be dwelling on this for the rest of my years, and I'm not going to be certain if I made the right choice between us. I'm going to be thinking about you until the end of my days. A lot of these people struggle to make committed decisions in their relationships, and they struggle to follow through with a lot of personal decisions as well too. So is it any surprise that Louie is having a bit of a meltdown over this? And to me, it makes me think, there's probably also a fear of losing the person as well too, but not over the full ramifications of what this is actually going to involve. And a lot of avoidance, as we know, will feel temporary relief once this is over. It's almost like, oh, thank God, I don't have to make a decision about this anymore. The pressure of this relationship and commitment is no longer here. Hallelujah. Of course, it's short-lived relief. But yeah, I think that what I'm sensing here with Louie is that he was convinced that breaking up with you, Louise, was the right decision for him, and that he was somehow doing you a favor because you deserve to be with someone who, could be a good partner for you, and also saying that, you deserve to have a better person around. And I just think the fact that, he broke up with you as soon as you came back from a vacation without actually having an ongoing conversation, not okay. Not okay at all. Yeah, sure, he tried breaking up the relationship twice, but his excuses of, maybe it's our personalities. Yeah, fuck that shit. No, it's not your personalities that are different. Clearly, to me, it sounds like just committing to a relationship with someone where you have to be emotionally, close to that person makes me think he was not comfortable with taking that any further, and it really freaked him out. And he was really feeling quite fragile around that. So to me, when I hear that, I'm like, definitely doesn't sound particularly good. And it sounds like he was letting his fears rule this experience. And the fact too that he was avoiding couples counseling, Bible studies to go over this makes me think he did not want to confront the, proverbial elephant in his room. He did not want to confront a lot of this. And it sounds to me like, confronting it probably for him would mean, oh, now I have to face this fear and I'm not ready to do that. And I don't want to actually have to get more engaged with you in a relationship. So yeah, not particularly great. Now, one of your questions is, do I think he's more fearful, avoidant, or dismissive? My answer is, I don't know. And the reason being that he doesn't give me those strong tendencies one way or the other. I suppose I am sort of feeling inclined to say maybe a little bit more dismissive. But at the end of the day, there is still obviously a dominant fear of intimacy that's playing out here. And fear of intimacy is the name of the game when it comes to anyone with an avoidant attachment style. So when I hear this, I think, probably doesn't really matter as much if he's, dismissive or fearful. The fact of the matter is he's just afraid of being able to commit, to a deeper, loving relationship with you. And so that's my answer there, is saying I can't say definitively if it's one or the other, but that fear of intimacy is damn striking. This is what I was thinking of as a symptom of autism as well too. You were asking if sarcasm is a trauma response. And my answer is, for some neurotypes who are autistic, they can be very sarcastic. But if we put the trauma stuff in the mix as well too, sure. Some people who are, perhaps trying to avoid difficult conversations might resort to jocularity and sarcasm to divert the conversation and to avoid, dealing with anything that's particularly unpleasant. So yeah, sure, that's that can be a trauma response of sorts. But I wouldn't go as far as to say sarcasm is a definitive trauma response. It's not always. I wouldn't say it's it's 100% a trauma response in all cases. I'd say, it can show up from time to time. Look, to be honest, I think sometimes developmental trauma can make people very funny. So as someone here says, maybe deflecting. My ex would always make jokes when I try to talk to him about serious stuff. So yeah, I'd say, and as someone else here has asked, was it really sarcasm or backhanded compliments? It could be either of those. So, I'd say I can't say for a definitive certain as to whether it's a trauma response. If it was more like backhanded compliments or like passive aggressiveness, I'd say, maybe a little bit, but we'd need to know what the motivating factor was. For example, is someone's response to closeness and intimacy to try and de-escalate the situation? A really explicit example might be for example, if you're having sex and all of a sudden your avoidant partner starts telling a joke in the middle of you two making out together to try and, ruin the intimacy between the two of you, in which case I'd say that is definitely getting into the realm of a trauma response, because it's that person's clearly uncomfortable with being close and intimate with another person, and they don't like the idea of being, maybe that involved with another human being. So yes, that would be my definition of jokes plus trauma in that context. Then you asked, is overthinking a trauma response? It depends again on the context. In the case of Louie. So Louie is obviously ruminating a lot about, the future of your relationship. Do I commit? Do I stay? Do I go? My answer is that's a symptom of relationship obsessive compulsive disorder, which is generally speaking a sign of developmental trauma. So yes, in that context, absolutely. But I don't want to make it seem like overthinking in general is a trauma response. Not at all times. I would say, if anyone is under significant stress, I think they're going to feel like I haven't got a grip as to what I want to do in my situation right now. It doesn't mean you're coming from a place of childhood wounding. So that's where we need to be a little bit discerning as to what the context is behind the overthinking. Do avoidance experience more emotions around animals such as dogs? That's when I saw him at his happiest. No. Some avoidance actually can be very pet phobic and don't like being around animals. And again, this makes me go back into the autism sort of side of things, where I'm some neurotypes who are autistic actually have a great affinity with animals instead of human beings. So I'd say it's not necessarily, I would say, a sign of someone with avoidant attachment as such. It can be a sign of other things. And some people just generally prefer pets over human beings because of bad experiences with humans. So that can be a thing too. So I'd say no. I've definitely seen and heard some stories of avoidants who are not pet friendly at all. But some are. Some are very dog friendly in particular. But it depends from person to person. Is someone being stoic a sign of emotional unavailability? Now, this one I'm going to give more definitive answer and say it can be. So I worry, particularly when I hear men who get very passionate about stoicism. And I think the problem with that is that sometimes that stoic sort of, fervor can be a way of relating to men who are very emotionally unavailable. It's almost like a badge of honor, I don't have emotions, I'm above all of that, and therefore I'm stoic and I'm not, someone who's being ultra feminine. The problem is, I think that a lot of men who go into the realm of being stoics have probably come from, overbearing mums. And so they've had a lot of, lectures and talks of how to show up as a man, respecting women. And they've taken on way too much of their parents' stuff. And they haven't actually learned to, evolve healthy masculinity. And so at times, I see a lot of stoics actually championing very unhealthy masculine traits where they're trying to neglect their emotions. They advocate being cool as a cucumber and not being very flighty over certain situations. And look, I'm not saying stoicism is all bad. It's certainly not. But when you start to see people who, get really intensely, in love with their stoicism, I sort of think, okay, are you just being emotionally negligent now? In which case, that's not real manhood. Real manhood is being able to articulate, express, champion how you're feeling in ways that are healthy, creating a safe container for those that are around you, individuating too. And when you start to try and scrub that out by trying to show how hyper independent you are, that's when I'm like, now you're living your trauma. There's nothing really, healthy about that form of stoic behavior. So yeah, I'd say stoicism and emotional unavailability can certainly go hand in hand. And finally, is crying an emotional release but not a way of processing emotion? It can be. So crying is something where it can be a build-up of emotion which comes up for people, and then eventually it's just a way of releasing how they're feeling. But it doesn't mean that release of emotions is then beset by an epiphany that's of benefit to the person. For example, you might be someone with an avoidant attachment who's crying because you feel like, I just don't know what to do in this relationship. I don't want to hurt you, but I just don't know if you're the right person for me because of our personalities, etc. And so that crying can be all that pressure building up inside of them where they're, feeling like, don't want to hurt someone, don't want to be a bad person, but don't want to be in this because I'm scared of commitment and intimacy. And so it might be, that emotional release. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm crying because I can feel the loss of my decision making. I feel like I'm in touch with my emotions. It might just be a build-up that's happened in that particular moment. Crying in a way that's, I'd say more in the realm of you're crying, you're releasing, you're allowing yourself to, allow yourself to process a lot of deep things that have happened to you from your past. That's more in the realm of something like, say, you've done a lot of anger work around, say, a parent who mistreated you, and then you're grieving and crying about how you didn't have a proper healthy childhood. That emotional release is more consistent with healthy development, healing, than just an episode where you're crying due to a fear of intimacy of like, I don't want to upset you because I don't want to be a bad person. That's not the same. But it's, it's still good to cry if you want to. I'm not about to oppose that. But crying does not always equal you're having this moment of enlightenment off the back of it. In any case, I'm going to round out there. So, Louise, thank you for sharing your story about you and Louie. I'm terribly sorry that you had an experience where this guy, who I think from the sounds of it, was very much into you and you also wanted to have an engagement with him, and it sounds like you were working towards that. I'm terribly sorry that it just didn't really work out in a way that you would have liked. And if anyone wants to share their opinions with regards to Louise's story, please feel free to throw them in the chat below. I do think this is definitely more than just avoidant attachment though. I think there probably is a bit of a neurodivergence thing going on there too. I could be wrong. I'm not an expert in neurodivergence, as I've said, but it does seem consistent with what I know of some neurotypes, particularly who are autistic, like I said. In any case, I'm going to go to Q&A, and I also just want to state, I think I might come on later to do another Ken Reads today or tomorrow, just to keep the traffic flowing, so to speak. But let's go straight into Q&A now, and we can take it from there. So what are my thoughts on presumably Louise saying, I don't see us taking the next step, getting serious after being together for 8 months. He seemed into the couple, then an abrupt discard, 2 to 3 weeks of distancing prior. Is this a common phrase when they start deactivating and start fault finding? So I just read this again. I don't see us taking the next step and getting serious after being together for 8 months, and then abrupt discount. I'm assuming, okay, so is this a common phrase when they start deactivating? Yeah, it can be. So when you've been in like a long-term relationship with an avoidant attacher, and let's just say it's been 2 years, and you're looking to get more serious, and they're saying things like, oh, I just don't think that it's the right time to be thinking about that. We have so many issues that we need to work out. It's their fear of intimacy playing up, their relationship OCD. In that moment, they are freaking out about the future. They don't want to deal with it. Their comfy middle ground at that moment is to stay in existential limbo where they can have a foot out the door if they want it. They want to control the dynamic at this point because they do not want to feel as though they are being forced into something which could be forever for them. So there are times where when you're trying to escalate and be like, can we discuss where this is going, that their fear of intimacy perks up and they are going to start backpedaling, taking 2 to 3 weeks to check out of the relationship because it makes them feel incredibly shitty inside of themselves. It's not a particularly pleasant feeling for avoidance when they go through that. They often check out of the relationship. Some of them may even land in hospital because they start losing control of their shutting down process, and like they stop losing control of a lot of their compartmentalization. And so they will rationalize and be like, see, I don't want to have to think about this because then I go through a dark episode and I can't handle it. But their dark episodes should not be the basis to which they should control a relationship. It's not okay. They need mental health support. If you're that scared of being in a committed relationship to someone who's behaving like a healthy, functional human being, you have issues that you need to work on because it's not okay to hold someone back from having something which you may have agreed to work on together. And if your excuse is, well, we just have such differences in personality and this has never been an issue before and is not really an issue now, then I'm sorry, that is not a valid excuse. It's just BS, so not okay. What type of trauma or fear would cause a dismissive avoidant to go the extra yard to make their life private from their exes, even wanting their friends to hide their social media posts because the dismissive avoidant is tagged and doesn't want to show his or her post to their exes? Control. So to me, it would seem to me like the trauma they've probably gone through is that they've had someone in their life who's probably tried controlling their privacy, tried controlling their life, tried micromanaging how they show up. And so they're doing that to an intimate partner to avoid feeling controlled from someone who's close to them. That's usually how it would play out. Now, that control doesn't always have to be from an overbearing parent. It could also be that a parent has unilaterally decided, as you would as a parent, to send them to like a boarding school. And even if the child never, ever wanted to go through that experience, they may hate that a lot of that agency was taken away from them. Now, as a parent, with all due respect, you are making a lot of choices for your kids. That is to be expected. But when you send a lot of children to boarding school, it doesn't always mean they're going to turn into avoidance, but it does often take away a lot of their sense of safety, choice, and agency in as part of their development. And they can carry a lot of that wounding and then also manifest that in their relationships too, even if they didn't have a classically overbearing, enmeshed parent in that dynamic as well. So that's a thing that can happen. Let's see. Is it common for an avoidant partner to not show you much physical affection and shut down during sex? Absolutely yes, because when you are getting sexually involved, you're also being more emotionally intimate from time to time. Like, I mean, when you think about it, if you're having an emotional connection with an avoidant attacher and you're also at your most vulnerable when you're physically intimate, it can cause the avoidant to start, trying to micromanage that sexual encounter, reduce having sex with you, and also have physical, issues like erectile dysfunction if they're a man, or if they're a woman, they might just, withhold altogether and be very stiff and cold. And that's not necessarily because, in the case of the woman, it's because she suffered any, significant, trauma from like a DV situation or an SA situation. It's more just because, she's trying to protect herself from fearing that she's going to lose her agency to whoever she's sleeping with. So that's where I'd put it there. Someone here has asked, how to know if they're avoidant or narcissist? Look, to be honest, that requires such a rigorous diagnostic criteria. But I guess if you want like the summary of like what distinguishes someone who's just avoidant versus just a narcissist, whilst a lot of you have probably dated someone who is an avoidant attacher with narcissistic traits and tendencies, someone who may, have more than just an avoidant attachment style, if we're looking at someone who is also likely a narcissist as well with an avoidant attachment style, then we're looking at someone who has displayed patterns of possible grandiosity, entitlement, incivility across many of their relationships exclusive of yours. Are they the haughty, grandiose narcissist who is a financial controller, paranoid about everything that you do, always hiding their phone from you and needing to control your phone to see what you're up to? Are they the covert narcissist who's always the victim of everything that's going on? Life just never seems to hand them anything easy, and they continue to be sulky and moody and blame everyone for all the problems that they're going through. If there's those dimensions as well too, we could be dealing with someone who is a narcissist as well as someone with an avoidant attachment style. If they don't exhibit such extremes, then perhaps we're not dealing with someone who's in that sort of territory. We might just be dealing with someone who frankly can be a bit of a jerk. So it's not always the case that, that stuff is coming out. I want to also make it clear, if the bad behavior is usually coming out because you've had a period of getting emotionally closer to that avoidant partner, and that's when their fear of intimacy perks up, then chances are you're dealing with someone who's just an avoidant attacher who has these tendencies when they're getting activated. But if you're also finding that a lot of this rude, disagreeable behavior is coming out outside of just of those moments, we may be looking at someone who's more than just avoidantly attached. And just bear in mind too, it may not just be narcissism. It could be bipolar, borderline, amongst many other things as well. It's never usually just one thing. But I think one thing to always go back to is, how does this behavior make you feel? Do you like this? Are you enjoying this? Because I can assure you that whilst there's totally nothing wrong with doing your homework and trying to figure out, are they a narc or are they an avoidant for a period of time, you will get to a stage eventually where you're like, it almost doesn't matter what they could be. I just simply don't like the way I was treated. But yeah, I'd say the fear of intimacy stuff in my experience is a lot easier to identify than the personalities and the mood disorder stuff. Like that stuff is a lot more tricky to quantify compared to, are they having issues around intimacy, abandonment, depending on where they sit in the attachment style stuff. Because those fears are usually very explicit. But the mood and the personality stuff, that can be, mercurial, and it can, and sometimes blatantly obvious in certain situations. But again, everybody's situation is very different. And so we have to sort of look at it holistically. All right, next question. If a dismissive avoidant does try to heal, realistically, is it realistic for them to heal under 5 years, or does it take decades? My assumption is that it will take a lifetime based on all the cases I've read, unfortunately. Yeah, look, when I say it takes an avoidant 3 to 5 years to heal from their attachment style, I should be honest, I'm plucking a lot of that from literature from Pia Mellody, who wrote the books Facing Codependence and Facing Love Addiction. And she herself is a former therapist who worked with a lot of clients who have attachment issues. And I mean, her book's from like the 80s and the 90s, right? So, a while. Now, we've actually got more sophisticated technology for helping people. But in saying that, when you've got a lot of entrenched, maladaptive attachment stuff, developmental trauma, right? It's unrealistic to expect that you are going to unlearn how you relate to someone in a short period of time. You've built up years of walls, defensive behavior. When you're living in your wounding, it takes time to get out of that. And that is an ongoing journey. So in terms of, going through this experience, I'd say be mindful that if you're going to go through the journey of recovery off the back of this, or you're concerned about letting an avoidant back in who's only done like less than 3 years of therapy, I'd say I'd be worried about how much progress they've actually made. The deeper, harder stuff for avoidance is always going to be facing intimacy, facing connection, right? Because that's where their fears are. And that is something that's going to need to be challenged rigorously. And usually the first years of therapy are not going to be addressing that stuff head on, because that usually causes avoidance to run. They need to be coaxed and also feel safe to go into that stage of working through that. You can't rush this process. I know there's a lot of people online who talk about how you can heal this stuff in 3 months, but they're delusional. You can't heal this stuff in 3 months. It takes a long time to heal this. And also, anecdotally, I've worked now with a few avoidants for quite a while, and their progress is always slower than other attachment groups. I've spoken to colleagues, some of which who work with avoidance almost entirely because they work in the addiction field. And again, they'll often echo back and go, yeah, it takes a long time for these particular clients. And for colleagues who are avoidantly attached, they've often said, yeah, it's taken me about 10 years to actually feel like I've earned my secure attachment. So that's why I'd say don't get your hopes up, because unless they're a unicorn, which I'm not saying they don't exist, the chances are that they probably haven't healed that fear of intimacy, anytime soon. It's a pretty deep wound and a pretty hard thing to knock. So yeah, let's see, what else have we got here? My fearful avoidant is resisting non-judgmental communications and refuse to learn skills together. Should I give up? That's a great question. So I don't know your particular situation, and I can't give you a direct yes or no. But what I will say generally across the board, and I found this with my own experiences, when you are trying to do your very best for a partner who's refusing to come on board and do the bare minimum, eventually you'll get to a point psychologically where you burn out and you're like, I've done everything that I think is reasonable. I've read all the books. I've tried all the techniques. I've watched all the videos. I've learned about attachment styles. I've maybe gone to therapy to work on myself. I've done everything short of choking myself to make, this work. You will eventually get to a point where your resentment builds and you become frustrated because you realize I have tried bending myself like a beachside deck chair for this person who's not budging. Now, granted, not every avoidant will behave the way that you're describing, but if you're dealing with someone who in your case is a fearful avoidant, who is not working to try and meet you halfway and be reasonable, and you're starting to burn out and feel resentment, I gotta tell you, most people usually don't have much longer left to give in their relationships when they get to that point. When they start to burn out and feel like I've had enough of this, usually that will be where things go. So, and it's important because I really want to stress to a lot of people, I am not the kind of person who urges you to break up with your avoidant partners on the basis that for a lot of you, if this is your first time in the rodeo, I think a lot of you want to actually try to not leave any stone unturned. You want to try and see if you can actually make this work. And that's why I think it's really important to give it a go, because not every avoidant attacher is going to behave the same way as the extreme ones are. So it's good to see if you're actually going to be able to make it work. I can assure you that once you've done that once, if you ever have a situation with someone else who's like this, your patience and your sensitivity for dealing with this? Well, your sensitivity is going to increase and your patience is going to reduce, meaning that you're not going to invest as much time in people who just aren't at a similar level to you going forward. So that's why I'd say, on one hand, I think it's really important to get to a point where you're like, I've done everything I can that's reasonable, and I'm willing to call it quits here if I feel like nothing's going to change. You need that boundary for yourself. Otherwise, you might be like what this person's saying here. I was patient for years. I hurt so bad to stay and watch them change into someone else. Don't allow yourself to get to a point where you're feeling like that. A lot of you will, and like it happens. And it's good to maybe go through once, even though I would never wish that on anyone, because you almost need to go through it once to feel like, yeah, never again. We only learn by making mistakes, unfortunately. So that's why I'm a big fan of try, do what you need to do. And as someone here said, this is spot on. This is my first rodeo, but I'm finally at a place that I would not try that again. Brilliant. I want you all to give it a go before you call it quits, on the basis that give this person a chance. Try. A lot of you don't know. Now, to someone like myself, I can usually see the writing on the wall from a mile away, but it would still be arrogant of me to tell you what you should do with your partner. I don't fucking know them from a bar of soap. You know, sure, they might be behaving badly, but also, isn't this about you discerning for yourself what you're willing to put up with in your relationships? Isn't this part of your growth in figuring out actually what you deserve as well too? You can't learn that stuff sometimes from other people yapping at you and telling you, you deserve better. Well, maybe I feel like I deserve this person. Maybe I actually want to be with this person because yes, they may be treating me badly, but I feel like I can make it work with this person because when we're good, it feels incredible. I'm not here to take that away from anyone. At the end of the day, it's really important to, learn, what you like, what you don't like. And so, it's really important to figure out a lot of this stuff as you go through it. I can see someone here says, then they blame you for leaving. I became the villain at the end, even though I stayed and did everything I could to make it work, which is terrible. So I think what's dreadful about some cases is that avoidance will blame you for leaving because they don't want to be the villain. And I've said before, they have a core wound of not wanting to be a bad person. So what do? Blame shift to make you feel like you're the bad person. You're the problem. You're breaking up with me. You're making me feel bad, which is not okay because usually a lot of these times they've been the catalyst for a lot of this stuff, which is not to say you haven't done anything wrong, but much of the time, the majority of the issues lie on their side of the street. So, it's pretty bad when you're then made to be the villain for someone else's villainizing behavior. So, yeah, not okay. All right, let's continue. Why would an avoidant claim that reciprocating oral sex makes them feel vulnerable? That is a very explicit question. I'm happy to answer that, but just got to say, I wasn't expecting that kind of question. Okay, so why would they say it makes them feel vulnerable? I kind of alluded to this a while ago, but a lot of the time, we might see avoidant attachers try and control what goes on sexually with another partner because they don't want to give their partner a sense of control over them. So when it comes to, I'm not going to get too explicit, but when it gets to certain things that happen, like say orgasming and also, allowing themselves to actually reciprocate and enjoy a sexual experience, some avoidants don't even want to go there because they don't want to make it feel like they're actually giving their partner, a shred of themselves because they worry that that'll be used against them. A lot of this goes back to their childhood experiences where they had a lack of control, they were controlled, they had an overbearing caregiver. And so if you're finding that in that particular department that they're saying, I don't want to do that because it makes me feel vulnerable, it may not be a SA, a DV related trauma thing that's coming up there. It may actually be a form of them trying to control you and avoid feeling like they're, allowing themselves to reciprocate and maybe be in a bit more of a vulnerable position when they're having sex with you. Some people have some very valid reasons as to why they wouldn't want to do oral sex, for instance. Some people have some very valid reasons as to why they don't like being out of control with sex. But when it comes to, a lot of avoidant attachers, it's usually not because they're it may not be exclusively because they're victims of sexual related trauma. It's usually because they're trying to control how much of themselves they give to you out of fear that you're going to somehow take that and use that against them to trap them and to control them. So yeah, just want to say that is quite common, unfortunately. But again, I want to make it very clear that I don't want to take light of anyone who's been through an SA or DV situation, because that's appalling, and the amount of legacy trauma that, that leaves someone is absolutely shocking. So I want to make it very clear that if you're someone who understandably has had a history of DV related stuff that's that's hurt you, particularly sexually, then I get it, because that can affect a lot of people. But I want to make it very clear that we're not talking about that side of the street with this particular stuff. We're talking about when a fear of intimacy is controlling another person's involvement sexually with you. That's a very different style of relating that happens. All right, let's keep going. The dismissive avoidant I was talking with left me saying, I can't, and 2 months later is now in a relationship, posting her all over WhatsApp. How could he do that? I have strong urge to be very blunt here, because this happens a lot. Firstly, I'm sorry that's happened to you, because it's horrible, jarring, and not okay when that happens to you, to see them doing that. Now, the blunt side of me just wants to say, well, of course they do that. This is what happens all the time. Not every avoidant does this, but a lot of avoidants will move on very quickly to get over you, to move forward, not to move on, to move forward by avoiding any of their feelings of shame about their behavior, to have a fresh start, to try and do something new with this person, to take all of the positive feelings from their time with you into the next person. And they do that because they're trying to get away from the aftermath of his experience with you, or their experience with you. So that's why a lot of that happens. It's not done maliciously, but you have every right to be furious about it, because it's unfair, it's cruel, it's not okay. This person's probably not going to own up to the fact that they're doing it. In fact, many of them will often still try and keep you in contact. Hell, they may even be flirty with you. They may even try reaching back out to you in the future and try, sleeping with you in the future or being sexual. It'll be on their terms. You will become the backup external validation source for them to make them feel better. And if at that stage you want to call them a narcissist, you're very welcome to, as far as I'm concerned, because it is very narcissistic to use someone like that. It's not okay. It's immature. It's really just not cool behavior in a relationship, but unfortunately it happens more often than you might think. So yeah, that's a thing. Is it common for dismissive avoidance to use addiction to avoid you in the relationship? Yes. So addictions like porn, sex, so cheating, alcohol, drugs, workaholism absolutely become their way of avoiding you. I'm going to tell you this now. When you're, in love with an avoidant attacher, then, you're not going to be their first love. Their first love will always be their addictions. And this is the severe end. If an avoidant attacher has active addictions to work, to sex, to drugs, to porn, to whatever it is that they have, hell, it could be video games. The point is, that will always be their first love over you. You will never be their first love at all. And even if you are on the receiving end of a lot of their love and attention, and they're telling you things like, you're like a drug to me, the thing that is a drug to them is the romanticization of you. When you become actually available to them and want to have a committed relationship with them, that is when their fantasy takes a massive nosedive and they freak out over the possibility of this becoming real. So please bear in mind, these people will often, a lot of the time, love whatever substance allows them to deal with the chaotic and painful feelings inside of them, and it will not be you, because engaging with you means they have to face what's inside of them, and a lot of them are not prepared to deal with that. So just want to put it out there and say, yeah. And I actually argue that whilst dismissives do this, I got to tell you, fearful avoidants, probably more notorious for doing this than the dismissives, because they've often come from nasty trauma from their childhood experiences. So it's quite common for a lot of them to dissociate and numb out on drugs and alcohol, etc. So yeah, it does happen quite a bit. Let's keep going. Dismissive avoidants are afraid of intimacy, yet sex can be their addiction. Why is this the case? Okay, so let's differentiate. Intimacy, emotional closeness is what I refer to when I say intimacy. I ain't talking about sex when I refer to intimacy. When I'm referring to emotional intimacy, I'm talking about getting closer to that person emotionally, getting to know each other, having adult conversations. I fear that X. I have shame around this. I feel triggered when this happens. So when that happens, can we try doing something around this? And I want to work on my triggers. Sex is a very euphoric experience that can also include emotional intimacy, because I often, in my experience, and this is my opinion, think the best sex is with those that we actually have an emotional connection with. Doesn't mean to say that you can't have good sex without it, but I generally prefer it with someone I actually care about. And so when we are looking at sex in isolation of emotional intimacy, sex can be a drug. It can be a coping mechanism for a lot of avoidance, which is why they may seek it out by cheating on you, by going around and sleeping with tons of other people to avoid being close to the person they're emotionally closest with. That's why they may have a sex addiction issue where, they end up choosing not to sleep with you, not because they find you unattractive, not because they don't think you're a great person. None of that. If anything, it's actually the complete opposite. It's the fact that you're being close to you, it's too triggering for them and they need to be away from you. And it goes back into their control issues. They need to control the sexual intimacy they give to you as well too. Why? Because they don't want to feel controlled by you. Would you ever control this person? Probably not. But are they doing this as a way of trying to make themselves feel better? Yeah, much of the time they are. So that's how it often plays out. I once again just want to put a disclaimer that not every avoidant attacher behaves this way. We are talking mostly about the extreme end of the spectrum, which I know is a lot. So, just putting it out there and saying, I work with some avoidant clients who would never in a million years behave quite like this. So just giving that delineation, because I don't want it to be all avoidants do that, because they don't. Let's look into this. Let's look at more questions. Can you explain the cognitive dissonance of avoidants who intentionally attend NVC or therapy? I'm not sure what NVC stands for. If someone wants to put that in the chat, they can. It feels like he's convinced himself he did the right thing after ending a great long-term relationship. Okay. So I'm assuming this person has still decided to go to therapy, but through the therapeutic journey decided that they needed to end the relationship with you and are still now going to therapy as a way, nonviolent communication, thank you, and is now justifying the breakup with therapy to basically state, yeah, this was the right decision for me in the first place. This happens a lot, unfortunately. So I guess to give an example of this, I've heard cases where an avoidant partner is participating in couples counseling and the therapist may not be fully trained, equipped, or have the skill set to understand what's actually going on. Worse, they may actually, for example, if it's like a male avoidant client with a woman who's a therapist, the therapist, and this is like a stereotype, I'm not saying this happens all the time, but the female therapist may, have a pseudo-maternal relationship with the male avoidant client, which mirrors as something that he's gone through in childhood, and then basically encourage the avoidant client that it's in his best interest to break up with his girlfriend, and ultimately it becomes an act of re-traumatization. And in those cases, the avoidant client might conclude, I did the right thing, problem solved, my ex-girlfriend was the problem. Again, it's a very gendered stereotype, but it does happen quite a lot. And in that context, they might rationalize and think, oh, well, the therapist said I was right, so therefore my thinking around this was right the entire time. That's what can happen. But if you're talking about the cognitive dissonance you're feeling of how could a therapist betray our trust by, enabling this situation to happen and for them creating this experience in the first place, that is a different situation altogether. So I've heard of situations where, understandably, the poor, partner who's been on the receiving end of this bullshit has felt betrayed by the therapist who was supposed to facilitate, them trying to work on this. And they can often feel like they were made out to be the problem. God, I've even heard of one person who was accused of having BPD by a professional who should never have been able to diagnose anyone with anything. And they were made out to be the problem when in fact they hadn't done anything wrong and they weren't the reason for why the relationship was ending. So, that can be really, really awful if you're someone who's been made out to be, the villain by a mental health professional when you shouldn't have been. I'll be honest, when I've seen clear evidence that there's a mega avoidant person in a pairing or a mega anxious person, depending on who it is, I will usually, address that person directly and be like, I think we need to talk about the stuff that's playing out here because this is something I think you need to address in individual therapy. And I think it's more of a you thing than a them thing. So I'm pretty explicit. I will often try my best to address it in a much kinder way than that. But the point is that, I'd say it's hard to reconcile betrayal when a therapist has enabled a breakup with an avoidant partner and they facilitated it. So sorry if you've gone through that because it unfortunately happens far more commonly than, I would care to admit, but it's really painful when you've had a mental health professional betray your trust and also end a reasonably good relationship and the avoidant partners just run with it, being like, the therapist was right, you're the problem. It's like, okay, well, where's your agency in all this? So that happens a lot. All right, let's go on another one. Fearful avoidant ex wanted to get back together after a month. Had hooked up with 3 people during this time. Yeah, that happens a lot. And I asked for an STD test prior to being intimate. Good on you. Despite having one scheduled, she felt slut-shamed and cussed me out. Called off the reconnection 3 days later. Projection. Yes. Absolutely. Someone here's just quickly asked, can I say this live? Yeah, well, don't worry. You can see it when you wake up. Oh, God. Okay, so let's go back to this question. Is this projection that you know a fearful avoidant ex who has slept around between reconnection and you've been like, hey, can you please do an STD check? I'm going to be honest, I would do the same thing as well too. Her saying, you're I'm assuming it's a she. She's saying, you're slut-shaming me. No, girl, sorry, that is not slut-shaming. If you have been around with multiple people between, partners, I'm sorry, do you fucking diligence. And I'm saying that as someone who comes from a community where STDs are a real damn hot topic, where we need to be very concerned about that. I have seen, I am not joking, so many avoidants who have tried to avoid the fact that they do have an STD. Many of them, because they're sex addicts, often try to avoid bringing that up to their partners because they're worried they're going to be rejected if they bring it up. And frankly, they should be if they're, not disclosing it. Many people, I'm sorry, I've known so many amazing people who do have STDs, who bring it up and they are still accepted and loved by people around them. If you have an STD or you're sleeping around to the point where a partner's concerned, they have every right to be like, can you please do your due diligence around this just to make sure you're okay? Because it is a very real concern to have. So, not okay. I can see someone here has written, How about not even being told by the avoidant that she has a HSV? That's actually criminal. Here in Australia, if you don't disclose that you have a life-altering STD to someone, you can go to jail for that. That is a criminal act. So if you are choosing not to disclose that information in a country like Australia, you have chosen to be abusive, a criminal, and complicit in potential murder if it's something that's quite significant too. So not okay in my books. I get really, really incensed when I hear that sort of stuff because you can't fucking play around with STDs. You need to take that very, very seriously. I can see someone here says, my ex was hesitant to get STD testing prior to being intimate. It took him months. He was negative, but I think he didn't like feeling control, pressure to do it, and felt insecure that I would ask. I dated a guy who was like that as well too, and I'm like, I don't give a fuck about your insecurities at this particular point in time. Just go and get tested, because I don't want to be, I don't want to have something that I don't need to have. So I'm quite upfront and blunt about this sort of stuff. Again, I address it more kindly than I am now. But, my opinion is we ain't got time for insecurities around this. I get where the insecurities come from. I will validate anyone who's like, I don't want to be pressured into doing it. Get it? Totally respect that. But we're dealing with something that is actually kind of life and death. And most people don't want to have an unnecessary alteration to their lifestyle because you didn't disclose your STD status. So fuck you if you don't do that and you do due diligence. Not okay. And I've had some people who've actually been quite affected by it, where, they've been understandably traumatized because their partner did not disclose. So, no. And I agree with what this person here is saying. They should want to know too. Absolutely. To me, there's no excuse for it. And even if you don't like being controlled because you've had a controlling background, too bad. Not in this department. I do not care. My empathy for your situation at that point, down by 100 points to the point where I'm like, don't give a fuck. You need to address this very seriously. So, like I said, I'm very passionate about this because no one should have to have their life altered because you have an insecurity about being told to do an STD check. And God forbid you're dating someone who lies about having an STD. Just not okay at all. So yeah, that is my passionate 2 cents on that subject. Let's see, what else have we got here? Great question, by the way. Once again, I love the questions I'm getting from people. It's really, really good. Is there a correlation between avoidance and hypomanic behaviors, extreme anxiety, and guilt around deactivating and breakup? So when you say hypomanic, like bipolar, as in they do all kinds of extreme stuff after they break up with you. I want to state that it can be possible for a lot of them to do a lot of erratic things post-breakup. That is definitely true. I have to say, I've noticed a lot of hypermanic behavior in extreme avoidance who have, after they've broken up with you, they'll do all kinds of whack stuff. Go on benders. Have a lot of sex with a bunch of randoms. A lot of them will maybe hook up with someone very quickly to feel better about themselves. It's almost very uncharacteristic of them. Some of them actually become quite suicidal sometimes and express how their life is absolutely meaningless. And, you got to remember too that a lot of these people have a freight train of emotional dysregulation baggage that they haven't dealt with. So it's very common for a lot of them not to be able to cope with the decisions that they've made post ending a breakup. So I see someone here says a Tolstoyan amount of social media posting. I remember once I dated someone where they almost had a period of posting on social media so much post-breakup that there then was a period where they just didn't do anything at all. And not that I'm trying to enter the realm of social media post-reading and discerning behavior, but, you could tell something's clearly affected this person, because if their usual habit is to post once a day and they've done that religiously for years and then all of a sudden something's shifted, I have a funny feeling it's not just because they caught a flu and they've now, or they've lost their hands in an accident. So it's very, very, very common for a lot of avoidants to display very jarring, erratic, very confusing behavior that's almost symptomatic and consistent with what we would see in individuals with bipolar disorders. But once again, I'm not an expert in bipolar disorders. I've got like a big chunky book on my bedside table about bipolar disorders that I need to read, because it is actually worth, I think, looking into, because in some cases, like I've said, it's more than just avoidant attachment. And I've heard of some cases where I'm like, that is definitely a mood disorder along with something else that's going on too. So long story short, it absolutely is very common for hyper and hypomanic behavior after a lot of this stuff is happening. It's very weird. I mean, I get where it comes from. I'm saying it's weird if you're an observer. You're like, this is very uncharacteristic of you. Why are you dating someone that you've said to me repeatedly, I would never date a person like that? Why are you hanging out with all these people that you say you never like? Why are you going back to drugs and alcohol after you swore it off? Like, it's really quite jarring, out of character sort of stuff that can happen. Let's see, what else have we got here? You also, one last thing I'll say is, you may also notice they start engaging with a lot of toxic positivity online, saying things like, the only way to have a relationship is to communicate. And they'll have like tons of thought terminating cliches like, it is what it is, instead of actually engaging with the fact that maybe they were the problem. Maybe they had the communication issues. Maybe they were the reason for the breakup. So yeah, let's keep going. I'm going to do a few more and I'm going to call it for now, and then I'll come back later. Why would an ex breadcrumb for months send romantic videos, photos, and tell you how much he's missed you? It was cruel, and I never expected this. Because in those moments, they're not thinking about you. They're not thinking about your well-being. They're thinking about themselves. And in that moment, they're thinking about, how can I feel better about myself? I miss this ex of mine. I miss being with them. Maybe we weren't so bad together. Why did I break up with them in the first place? I really want to check in and see how they're going. I really want to be with them again. I love the connection that we had together. They make me feel so much better about myself. It can be their very shy, juvenile way of trying to approach you again and to see if there's an opportunity to reconnect with you. And I'm going to be blunt. The best thing you can do for these people at that particular point in time is to block them. I know I said earlier I don't usually give advice with regards to situations, but I'm going to give you advice in this one. They need to learn that this behavior is not okay. They need to learn that they cannot use you for validation and be, able to just return whenever they feel like it, because they're having a bad episode because of their bad decision making. People need to learn the consequences of their decision making. And if you want to engage with them, look, go ahead. I'm not going to stop you. I think it's totally fair if you feel like there's an opportunity there. But I honestly think, as this person says, block them. I mean, if this is your first time in the rodeo, I'd probably have different words for you, because some people aren't there yet, and that's totally fine. But if you are someone who is more grounded, can see the writing on the wall, and as this person has said, and it's declared to themselves, I do not want to be your emotional support dog, end that communication immediately. You are not there to make them feel better about themselves. They need to learn that for themselves. And you know what the best way to learn that is? To realize that when they push good people away, they will be left with nothing. And they need to learn that for themselves. I can see someone here says, easy said than done. Exactly. And look, me saying here, you should do this, is not intended for everybody. Some people are still in the throes of these dynamics and need to go through it. Not every avoidant attacher is, a lost cause. And this is where discernment and sussing this out is really important to figure out for everyone else as well too. But if we're dealing with, and I'm just going to characterize, someone who is using you, not being respectful of their actions, has come back to you in a short window of time without self-reflection and therapy, is someone who's not really taking any accountability for their side of the street, is someone who's approaching you with a, hey, how are you text message after they abruptly ended things. I don't think that's worth a second look. I really don't. It's actually kind of offensive and really disrespectful, especially if you really thought there was something special between you. Someone here has asked, do you think they ever learn anything? I think a lot of them have the chance to learn a lot. Like, I mean, if someone like Neil Strauss, who is an infamous sex addict and also a big, big, big player, who could learn about his avoidant attachment and reconcile it, I think there's absolutely an opportunity for it. But unfortunately, a lot of this is down to their own time. And a lot of this stuff, a lot of them know they have intimacy problems. They just don't want to admit it. I think it's one of those things where, you know, a lot of them have to eventually get to it in their own time. So, you know, it's one of those things where I would say it's not going to be a case where all of them have this epiphany and go, dear Lord, I effed up in this particular area of my life. And you've also got to remember too, right? Like, if you're building up so much guilt and shame over your behavior, right? Where you've got all of this legacy crap that you've built up and you know you've contributed to that, I got to tell you, as someone who's worked through their shame, which is the most disgusting emotion to work through, could you imagine holding on to all of that crap for so long? Of course you'd want to pretend it's not yours and to deflect it. I'm not saying it's okay to do that. I know that's not an excuse, but I'm just saying denying that, then having to sit with all of the compartmentalized crap that you've committed to, yeah, actually I think it would be kind of easier to avoid it, because you'd have to sit with an inventory of, you fucked up there, you ruined that great relationship, you lost out on so many great people that you could have been with. It's really, really, really hard to, you know, to just accept that. I've seen so many avoidants who will come to me in recovery being like, I feel like such a horrible human being for what I've done. And I'm like, yeah, fair. I'm not here to take that away from you. And I'm sorry that you feel that way. It's a shit feeling to have to sit with all of that, you know, karma, essentially. I can see someone here who says, I understand avoidance intellectually, but I'm having a hard time letting it sink in emotionally. Tips. This is a marvelous question. I can't give you any specific tips like off the bat, but what I can tell you is this. Emotionally, that is the thing that needs to actually come on board with this more than the intellectual stuff. The intellectual stuff helps, don't get me wrong. But if you're in a point where you're like, something inside of me is just struggling to get on top of this, here are the common things that I have identified that are usually there. 1, you might have a part of you that is still in love with your ex. Totally fine. It's actually really important to honor that and to allow that younger part of you to mourn what you've been through. So that's 1. 2, quite often we have an inner part of us that's going, but why did they do that? I would never behave that way. If they behave that way, it must mean I've done something terribly wrong. And it's very easy for us to have a case where we're constantly berating ourselves because our behavior is not the same as the other person's behavior. Again, valid. It's okay to feel confused and to feel just completely mind-effed off the back of this experience. It's very disarming, confusing, and frankly, very betraying sort of behavior. Not really a word, but we're using it now. You know, you're in shock probably, and it's very okay to feel like, what the hell just happened here? There also may be a part of you that, you know, has a lot of belief systems of, if they wanted to, they would. They weren't that into me. If they left me, it's because they found someone better to be with. And I want to just say very explicitly that it's okay if you have a lot of belief systems around love, around relationships. You may want to also question whether some of those belief systems are valid, because these experiences may make you realize that some of those belief systems are in fact not 100% accurate in all circumstances like yours. But if you're holding on to belief systems like, if they wanted to, they would, it is bloody hard to get your head out of it, because you may think, I was not good enough for this person. Now that is a big wound that you probably should look into, because that's a very common one for a lot of people to have. And a lot of people often think, if I was smarter, less needy, prettier, maybe we could have made this work. If I wasn't so busy, fixating on them, maybe I wouldn't have come across as such a needy person in this relationship. If I behaved differently, maybe things could have been different. I'm going to let you know. What you're dealing with is a great example of the what if monster. What if I did differently? What if they showed up differently? What if all of it? You've got to be very careful of when your what if monster wants to try and second guess and go over your experience and to try and work through it. At the end of the day, I'm just going to be blunt. A lot of this stuff is inevitable. You probably got as close as you got with this person before it all went to shit. And you probably did the best you could given the circumstances. So with that in mind, I just want to state that I think that given, where you're at, it's okay to feel like there's a lot of internal dissonance, where even if consciously you're like, yes, I get that this person's clearly got an intimacy issue, internally something inside you might be like, nope, I don't see it. I saw this person as loving me. I still want them to love me. That's fine. You've got to be where your emotional part of you is at and start working through that bit by bit and just take it from there. I know some clients who've, understandably had a history where they've been bullied for their physical appearance. And then their avoidant partner said something to them like, you weren't attractive enough for me and I just needed to find someone more attractive, which is a horrible thing to say to anyone. And instead of fixating on what a terrible thing to say to someone, they instead internalize, understandably, and say, clearly my looks were the basis for the breakup. If I was prettier, maybe this would have worked out. And I want to say, to the people who feel that way, very valid given your history. And you're probably not in a position where you're ready to hear, that jerk, how dare they say that to me? You're probably at right now thinking you are responsible for everything that just happened. And whilst that's definitely not true in that context, it's important to understand that you probably need to work through that part that you're on right now and just sit with that and unpack that, because chances are you might be ruminating and fixating on something internally that's not letting you see this entire situation for what it is. And a lot of it's just childhood trauma stuff that's coming up. So it can happen. So that's a very long answer, but it's really just here to state and to really emphasize that, it's quite common for a lot of people, because it's just really gets to people in ways that really cuts you up. And it's important to try and address each of those micro fractures, fissures and tears internally, because even if you consciously can get it, you've got to make sure that internal stuff is in alignment with what you're going through consciously. I can see someone here says, my therapist said it lasted so long because of the work I'd done, but he was always going to hit his threshold. I think your therapist has probably got a very good analysis of your situation. I don't know yours and I can't guarantee if that's the case. But yeah, that's usually what I would say is the case for majority of these situations, because I think that much of the time, I think we hit the threshold for a lot of these people. Many of them, with all due respect, come in, like a giddy child who is so excited for this relationship. I love avoidance for their enthusiasm. Hell, I love being love bombed by them. It's great. It's a lovely feeling. But just like anything in life, it doesn't last. Avoidants need to learn to realize that relationships are not always going to be fun and games. There are going to be some times where it's tough. Not abusive tough, just difficult. How do we navigate, interacting with family over Christmas? How do we navigate having a kid? How do we navigate, a lot of that sort of stuff? They often don't want to deal with that because they often think, oh, well, if I'm feeling uncomfortable, it means the relationship is bad. It's like, no, it's not. I was going to use a very different word there. But anyways, it's one of those things where you've got to be very mindful of the fact that, for these people, they are very trigger sensitive to any instability that happens in a relationship. You were probably going to get around to, having a breakup one way or another with a person like this. I can see someone here has said, my therapist was in it the entire time. when I expressed the first red flag, she defended him at first. Okay. No shade to your therapist. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know like what they're seeing and what they're hearing, because context does matter. But going back to what I said earlier to a previous person, be mindful of the fact that sometimes people who have unhealed stuff can project their issues onto your partner. This is especially true of, particularly men who might have a proclivity for being overbearing with their daughters, who then, side with maybe someone who's being a very dysfunctional, fearful, avoidant woman. A woman who's a therapist who's, maybe creating a pseudo mother-son relationship with your partner. That stuff is not okay if it happens, and those trauma bonds often happen a lot in some of these experiences. So it's easier said than done to say to clinicians, check your biases, but I'm still a work in progress with this too, but it's just to say that if you start to sense that there is a bias forming in that regard, you got to be really careful, because it's not okay. I know that circling back to something that someone here has said, there some avoidants are ready to bail for normal relationship hurdles that just require communication to get through. I had an example of that. I can't remember the specific example, but there was a situation I heard recently where an avoidant partner broke up with their partner over an issue around how can we see each other more frequently, and that became the basis for the breakup. Or similar to the story I read out today, our personalities seem different, therefore we should end this. It's interesting how things that would normally constitute a conversation become the basis for a breakup. And, it's just interesting how, these people can often jump the gun and terminate a relationship over something that isn't really a relationship ending issue. So it's fascinating how they're quick to terminate something which needs a conversation, and it can be hard. I can see someone here's written here, I'm a recovering fearful avoidant, becoming much more secure. It was hard to know if it was my avoidance or a yellow flag. Yeah, that's fair. I've actually heard a lot of fellow avoidants who've been in that situation too. So congratulations to you on all the work you're doing. I know that the journey for a lot of avoidants to becoming secure is the hardest thing they will ever do. Well done you for wanting to work on this, because I know it's very easy for a lot of those breakup urges to occur, and sometimes it's hard to determine, is this an avoidant thing or is this a genuine relationship issue? I'll give an example. I'm working right now with a client of mine who has an avoidant attachment and is in actually, a relationship that has moments of being controlling and also moments of there being, subtle signs of abuse. And they're also, as the client, experiencing moments of avoidant flare-ups, not telling their partner sometimes that they've had a change of mind and that they want to do something without telling their partner. They also have moments where, they are unsure as to whether or not they want to divulge, vulnerable information. To their credit, they have been more frequently telling their partner, when you say this, it brings up resentment for me. I am struggling to stay invested in this relationship. And recently they've started having some urges to, to be single, to date other people. And it's hard in those moments to be like, is this your avoidance stuff that's coming up that's causing this? Or is this a genuine case that the relationship might actually have its moments? And that's where sussing it out slowly over time is really important, because sometimes there can be overlap, but other times it can be a case of, no, actually, I think this is the wrong relationship for you and it's not your avoidant attachment. So it's really, really hard for a lot of avoidant attachers to discern, is this me or them? Am I truly creating all of this stuff up that I'm seeing and experiencing? Or is this actually a case that I am not in a healthy relationship and I've done the best that I can given the circumstances? So I'm not saying, we've got to give all of these people, a green card as an excuse. I'm saying that those that are really committed to working on this, congratulations, because I know how bloody hard it is. And I'm proud of you for actually taking the time, key thing, not rushing and jumping the gun, taking the time to learn, is this your avoidant triggers, which are usually a much more robust emotional experience, or is this an ongoing issue from the other person and I actually can stay clean in this experience? So I want to stress something to everyone here. A very unspoken trauma trait is rush, is hurrying, is trying to resolve things quickly. It's really important for people who have developmental trauma to slow down. And one of the best things people can do who have attachment issues is to take their time to discern, is this me or is this them? I guarantee it gets easier over time to figure a lot of this stuff out. But you need a lot of that intentional time, an accountability team that holds you aware of this and is like, yeah, that's definitely not a them thing, it's a you thing. Or, interesting, let's pass this out. Like, what do we think is yours? What do we think is theirs? Because if you can't see the writing on the wall, the forest from the trees, it is so easy to act out trauma and just conclude, yep, they're the problem, it's solved, I'm fine, they're shit, and I don't have anything to work on, it's okay. Because more often than not, it's probably not the case. So, and that is not just for people who have an avoidant attachment style. It is definitely true for anxious attachers as well too, because we can be absolutely crazy at times if we're not aware of how we're behaving in certain dynamics. All right, I'm going to make room for 3 more questions and then I'm going to call it for now. So we'll just go from there. I'm just going to see if I missed anything. I can see a lot of you guys have just been typing in the chat, which I appreciate as always. Always keeps me very engaged, which I appreciate. All right, let's do 3 more. Someone has asked, will these be on YouTube too? I love listening to these back. Yeah, it will be. So these videos usually go on YouTube a bit later on. And I think that it's one of those things where, just to sort of take you into my headspace. So right now, from a marketing perspective, because I'm never shy about talking about my business strategy, I post these videos because I just enjoy doing them. And also because with the letters, I want to turn that into like a revenue stream as well too. But in terms of like putting out content, I'm not putting out as much as I could for the reason that when I put out a lot of content, I get a lot of people who come to me who are fresh and looking for work with me, which I'm flattered. I love it. But I still have a giant wait list that I'm still working through slowly but surely. And so I want to prioritize getting to those people. I'm in the process of also creating, recreating and also making a much more sophisticated course than the one that I put out last year for people who have newly had a breakup with an avoidant attacher. So that way, if I start posting more frequently than I am right now, there's places for people to go, whether it be with my team, the course, a letter, and I have the capacity to just churn this out and grow. So when you ask, is this stuff going to be on YouTube? My answer is absolutely, but I just am taking my time with a lot of this because I can see that as I put out more of this stuff, I've received a lot of yay, love it, great feedback. Thank you very much. But I also want to be careful because I do not have the bandwidth to take on thousands of more people who are like, can I work with you? Because I can't. Until cloning's invented, I ain't got the capacity to do that just yet. I've thought about AI, but I don't think AI can quite do me as well as I think I can do me. And my team is lovely and amazing, and I highly recommend you work with them because they're all brilliant human beings. And some of them I actually think know more of their stuff than I do about this. So highly recommend you check out that. But I just wanted to give you a bit of an insight into the strategy. So short answer is soon, but not yet. Hope that answers your question. And I will probably do a podcast at some point too, but yeah, it's happening. Next question. I've been talking about the robot phase several times, specifically referring to fearful avoidance. Is it also common to see the robot phase in dismissive avoidance too? How does it manifest in both of them? Thanks in advance. I think it's pretty similar. Like, I think that when we're thinking about avoidant attaches when they deactivate and they start becoming cold like a robot, like it's almost like you're having a business meeting with them. It's very common for avoidant attaches, regardless of whether they're fearful or dismissive, to just be very cold, aloof, cordial, and act as though, you're just a stranger. So I'd say that when it doesn't really differentiate, in my experience, too heavily depending on the dismissive or fearful nature of the avoidant attachment. I'd say it usually happens when you've had a moment of closeness and you can see they're starting to shut down, and it's almost characterized as, hey, thank you for getting back with me. I'm sorry I've been out of touch. Work has been very busy lately. I've been really busy trying to navigate a lot of the ins and outs of my life. I think that given the circumstances, I just don't see us working out together. I think you would understand, given what I've been through, how hectic it has been for me to try and fit you into my life. I hope that you can see this as being in our best interests that we don't continue hanging out. Wish you all the best. Probably something like that, hey? That's usually the kind of message you'll receive from someone like this. I can see someone here says invasion of the body snatchers. It can definitely feel like that. I had a client literally say that to me yesterday. They were like, I feel like I don't even know the person I'm with. I'm like, yeah, well, they probably don't even know themselves as well too. When you have been trying your hardest to keep yourself under wraps this entire time, is it any surprise that a lot of the the stuff that we don't want about ourselves comes out not in drips and drabs, but in like huge slabs? And it's like, oh, I didn't recognize you actually had significant mood issues. I didn't realize you had a lot of repressed rage. Wow, that's shame. Beautiful. I wish it just wasn't directed at me. So yeah, it's pretty gross when a lot of those extremes start coming out, and it's just very, very out of character, and it is very frightening because you got to think about it like this. You are also going through some big cognitive whiplash. You are also going through a real reassessment of, I don't even fucking know this person anymore. You need to now come up with a new assessment in your head for what this person is capable of too. And sometimes it can be quite extreme. So just because you've had a good slice of this person for a while, and then they shut down, act like a robot, or become incredibly, all over the shop, that is new information that you now need to include with your assessment of this person. All right, final question. Someone here has asked the $1 million question. How do you know if they are avoidantly attached when you are dating them? And my answer is you probably won't. It gets a little easier over time because I can suss it out very quickly now. But I am going to give you my quick 2-minute sort of explanation for what are some of the key stuff that you can identify. Generally speaking, it's very tricky to discern whether this person is avoidantly attached in the early stages of dating. But there are a few things that are very consistent that you can start to identify. One is rush. Are they rushing you and trying to build intimacy as quickly as possible? And it may seem very genuine and innocent, like, oh, I haven't felt this way with anyone since my last ex. I really love this. I really want to keep hanging out with you. So what would traditionally be seen as green flags, you might want to make yellow and be like, where is this intensity coming from? Especially if they've had a history of loveless or very toxic relationships, which they've had for a very long time. And it seems like they're fresh back into the dating pool. They haven't done much time healing, and they're just back into it with gusto, and they're full on trying to date you. Yeah, as this person has said, love bombing. Yeah, that's one aspect. 2, if when they talk about their exes, it's colorless. They talk about it in terms of, we just weren't that compatible. Oh yeah, we just saw things differently and we had different views on life and we just ended it. Why? Why did you end it? They will struggle to answer those questions. What was your responsibility that you take forward from this relationship? They won't find ways to answer that. You may also find that they've had a history of short flings. And this is a key thing. Oh, I don't think I'm looking for a relationship. It'll only take me the right person to change my mind. that is like red flag 101. They're looking for the right person. Good luck. That unicorn doesn't exist. They may be someone who is very clear about the fact that they have such a lot of time at work and they wouldn't be able to make time for anyone because of the demands of their job. It's like, okay, well, thanks for basically telling me that you're emotionally unavailable. As someone here said, it's never them, it's the other person. Yeah, there can be a lot of that. In dating, you may find that when you try and talk to them about their past, they become very defensive. You may also find that when you talk about big emotions, that they don't want to hear about it. If they're fearful avoidance, they may be more inclined to trauma dump on you, talk about all the horrible things that they've been through. And you have to be like, well, that's lovely, but I don't know you yet and I'm not your therapist. So why am I hearing all of this information all at once? The DAs will sometimes just not share anything, whereas I find the FAs are more the extreme the other way, where they tend to be like, let me tell you everything about me because I need to guarantee that you actually have a connection with me, because if I don't feel it, then it must mean that we're not going to work out. It's like, no, hold your horses. Like, I don't need to validate your entire life story. So yeah, I'm gonna round it here, guys, because I got to go. Thank you all for attending this live. If I have the energy for it, I will come back around later this afternoon and I'll do another letter. But it's been a pleasure as always. I hope you got some value out of it, and I will see you guys again very, very soon.